Hello, this is The Limits of Our Language, a podcast about digital writing across the curriculum for teachers who believe in the need for development of multiliteracies inside and outside of the classroom. I'm Darcy Flansburgh. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Today I am here with Mr. Zachary Gerhard, who is a social studies teacher at our international school here in China. So welcome to the podcast, Zach.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started in talking about writing across the curriculum, tell us a little bit about your background and maybe how did you end up in China?
Sure. So I am a second generation international school teacher. My parents did this starting when I was 9 years old, so I actually grew up in international schools. After graduating from university, I was looking for a way to get back into that world and ended up teaching English in Thailand for a couple of years. And then made my foray into the international school teaching world here at Georgia School. So now I am a high school social studies and AP psychology teacher for the secondary.
And you were able to start teaching social studies because you have a background in history.
That's correct, yep.
So what was your bachelor's?
Social studies has always been a passion of mine, and the humanities in general. My bachelor's degree is actually in Arabic and Middle Eastern studies.
Wow, yeah. So obviously, I think social studies is one of the, I wouldn't say easier, but it's kind of the easier class to insert writing into. Because there's a lot of teachers who will, our middle school teacher at the school is both social studies and English, so he combines those
Sure,
topics
there's a lot of overlap, definitely.
Very easily. But at the same time, you are also more, your content involves a lot more memorization of like dates and places and events, and so you have to still include a lot of that into your curriculum.
Sure.
So in terms of how do you use writing in your current classroom? Like right now, tell everybody what classes you teach here, so what grade levels, and then what kind of writing you like to do with those classes.
Sure, and I think that's an important part of the discussion too, because I think that my position is a little bit unconventional in that I'm teaching 4 different types of social studies, right? It's not just history. So my 9th grade class is a world geography class. My 10th grade is world history, 11th grade is American history, 12th is comparative politics, and then as a supplement, I also have that AP psychology class. So I find this really interesting, just thinking about the type of writing that I do in each class. Kind of opened my own mind. Obviously I've thought about it, but not in this particular context. So with my 9th grade students, I've really focused this year on trying to get them to take the perspective of a geographer, right? So asking geographers questions, making observations about the world and about the areas that we're studying, and then drawing conclusions from those. And I've actually found that students don't realize how fun that can be, right? Until they're actually in the class, which is really cool. But at the base level, it is expository writing, just making observations and then recording those observations, right? Talking about specifically how physical geography affects human geography, right? How the physical world that humans live in affects the way that they live. Something that I've been trying to do a little bit more though is getting them to do some creative writing. So taking the perspective of, let's say, an immigrant who is new to a society, right? Or taking the perspective of a government official who is trying to take a stance on an environmental issue, right? With world history and American history, again, it's this constant dance between trying not to just have them rote memorize and spill it out on paper, and trying to challenge them to think like a historian or to practice their historical skills. So a lot of it is, for those 2 classes specifically, explaining the motivations behind specific actors in either an era or a historical event. So the one that I always come back to are the world wars, right? Or war is just a big facet of those classes.
Right.
And trying to understand the motivations behind why you go to war, or how you might try to get out of war, right?
Right.
Would be a big part of that.
So kind of putting them in the context of the situation.
That's absolutely right. And that's a huge part for me. I think it's very important to, high school students don't find this stuff very cool sometimes, right?
What? It's not a TikTok video?
That's right.
Oh no.
So I have found, recently especially, that getting them to take on the role of a figure, even a fictional character in that era of history, is a really cool way for them to find how interesting it actually is, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly with those two classes, because they're, it's that age, 10th and 11th grade, where it can be very cool or it can be very uncool.
Right.
And I've found that asking them to tell stories, particularly when they're doing creative writing exercises, but also in the expository, explaining what happened in an era, getting them to tell stories has been a really cool way for, the students who are doing the writing, but then also the observers of either a presentation or the readers of an essay to really engage with the material.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That sounds a lot like an activity called a RAFT activity. So the idea is that you, just like you're saying, you give them this, usually in an English class, it's that they're taking the perspective of a particular character in a story. Mm-hmm. So their role is the character, right? The audience is who are they talking to? So it could be that they're writing a letter. Yeah. Who are they writing a letter to, right? And then the form is a letter, right? Mm-hmm. That's the genre. And then the topic is, what is the topic they're writing about? So cool. It sounds a lot like a RAFT activity. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you knew you were doing that, but that is a common writing strategy that, at least in English classes, we're always taught to try doing a RAFT activity so they can feel what it's like to be in that situation. Yeah. So
that's actually perfect, because another big part of the investigation and the writing that happens in my class has to do with the analyzation of primary sources, right? So assessing what is the role of the primary source, the person who's writing or speaking in this situation, who are they speaking to, and then what's their perspective. So that would fit really well in my class.
Yeah, you should do some RAFT. Just call it RAFT.
That.
Call it. We're like, okay, we're gonna do a RAFT activity, everybody. I also like saying these terms and like finding the name for them, because then it's not like you're doing this brand new thing that they're like, wait, what are we doing? You're like, no, we do this every week. It's just like, that's why I have my writing structures. I'm like, we're going to write an axis paragraph. And they're like, they know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because once you like give it a name, it's like, first of all, it's not as scary, right? It's not like this scary thing that like, brand new activity, wait, how do I do this? If you're like, we're going to do a RAFT activity, and they're like, oh, like the one we did yesterday.
And I feel like there's a little bit of authority that comes from having a name for it too, instead of just saying, hey, we're going to write from the perspective of a Revolutionary War general or something like that, right?
Yeah, and it's just, I always thought those were fun because it usually kind of throws them. I do something, not exactly the same, but I'll do something where I have them write a scene from a story in the perspective of a different character. Cool. So like, let's say, like The Great Gatsby is written from Nick's perspective, and I say, okay, you're going to write this scene from Daisy's perspective. Yeah. And they'll start imitating the writing style, which I want them to do, because, not all of our students are great writers. Sure. So imitation is a great way to practice good writing styles. Yeah. So you could even like take a historical document and say, you're going to write this in this style from this historical figure's perspective. Yeah.
I'm having so many ideas.
That's great.
Like taking a primary source letter and writing a response to it.
Yeah.
Right? Would be, this is great.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, the RAFT is a really great activity, just because, and I love, like, as soon as you said creative writing, I was like, ooh, do tell. Because creative writing is also one that the students always want to do, but it's really hard to teach. You know what I mean? Like, it's really difficult to teach. Like, whenever I do my poetry units, and I'll always be like, okay, you're going to write a poem. It has to be 20 lines long. It's going to be about the topic of family. Anything. It could be anything about family. And it has to include alliteration, you know? And I'll give them like an idea, and then I'll be like, go. And they'll just sit there. And I'll think it's like, this will take like no time at all. It takes them like the whole class.
That's
because
right.
They're like, am I doing this right? And I'm like, there is no right.
Yeah.
It's just, are you covering those three parameters?
Right.
Go. And then they're just like, frozen for a minute, but if I said, okay, imitate this person's writing style.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them will do it like almost ridiculous. Like, I remember one student who literally took this scene and like word for word wrote it out, but changed the pronouns. And I'm like, well, you did change the perspective, but it's literally the exact same thing. Just the pronouns have been shifted.
Sure.
But you know what? He probably learned something just from the process. Just from writing it out. Right. I don't know. He's become a much better writer over time, and I think maybe even just imitating people's writing has helped.
Yeah, I mean, when I think back to my own high school education, that was some of the stuff that I found most interesting to do. Like, especially in my English language arts class, was if we had a poem, and maybe just because I was a nerdy kid, I liked taking that poem and rewriting it using, whether it was the same conventions or the same general theme, but trying to make it my own.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that reminds me of, not really a science person, even though married to a science teacher, but I had to do an activity in a science class, and I decided to write a poem about dissecting this worm.
Okay.
And I wrote it like, 'twas the night before dissection, and all I could think was, how will I get out of this sink? So nice. It was a raft activity from the perspective of a worm that was going to be dissected.
That's awesome.
And you know what? It worked for me.
Yeah.
It also made me not want to dissect the worm. So
empathy.
Right. So I know also that you do a lot of just to kind of shift to other types of writing, a lot of DBQ activities. So can you kind of explain what those involve?
Sure. So the DBQ, the first step is the analysis of the document. So for those unfamiliar, DBQ is a document-based question, and usually it's a document-based question assignment, right? Which typically consists at the high school level of reading between 6 and 10 documents. They could be documents in the traditional sense of being a letter or a decree or the transcription of a speech, or they could be images as well. And then we ask the students to break them apart. Again, assess the role of the primary actor or the person who's writing the document or creating the document, or those portrayed in the document, and then breaking down their bias, the context of the document itself within history, and then usually we take it a step further and ask them to write an essay based on a particular question which the documents inform the answer of.
So it's kind of a synthesis essay.
Absolutely, yeah.
So they're just basically, they're given a bunch of documents to use to then come to some kind of conclusion.
That's right.
Yeah. So that, honestly, like, that's, I think, is an extremely important skill when we're talking about, so part of my master's research is about like how we make our students informed contributors to participatory culture.
Sure.
So like going online and commenting on other people's posts and things, and how do they do it in an informed and intelligent way, using strong evidence and credible sources, right? And so like having activities like that really reinforces those ideas of like, I've gathered this information and now I'm joining the conversation.
Yeah.
That's what I always say for synthesis essays. I always say, you're joining the conversation. Imagine that each of these sources is a person,
right?
And you're having a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you think that process goes well? Do you do it often?
I do, yeah, and I'm finding that I do it more and more often now. Again, taking the perspective or performing a close reading of an individual's perspective on a particular event or an era or a theme, right? I think really, like in an English class where you're reading a novel, you develop an understanding of the perspective of that individual, right? And I feel that it gives the students an ability to form a more cohesive opinion, right? So they start to care, they start to get invested. The first time that I did a DBQ in one of my classes, I think we were studying the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan, right? And the question was the United States justified in dropping the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Ah, yes.
And it was tough
Yeah.
for some of them.
It's a really tough question.
Yeah. And the more you dig, the harder it gets.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't become easier. Now, for some students who have maybe an ethical predisposition, they know right away, and they're interpreting the documents from that predisposition. But it doesn't make it easy.
Right. Well, that reminds me of that quote. I mean, this is a very common quote right now. It's like, it seems like the stupid people in society are so confident, whereas the most intelligent people in society are not as confident.
Right.
Largely because, like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
That's right.
And it becomes more difficult to say with certainty this is true or this is not true.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is true. Well, then how about this document? And you're like, oh, now I don't know.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
So are there any writing activities that you would like to do in your class that you haven't had a chance to, or anything that you think that you're like, I wish I would like to do more of this? Or
yeah, I think actually this conversation and kind of thinking about this conversation before it started has made me realize that I would love to do a lot more creative writing. And I think that our conversation today is going to lead to that inevitably.
Awesome.
Yeah. For all of the aforementioned reasons, right? Really developing the empathy or the taking on of another perspective. I've really found that to be effective in my classes, but also like so important to a study of history. Yeah.
Great. Well, is there anything else that you would like to add before we kind of wrap things up? I know that you were thinking a lot about kind of writing in preparation for the podcast, and I feel like I kind of derailed us a little bit, but
not at all. I think so I had written some notes before coming in, and I think that really our goal, or at least my goal as a humanities teacher, as a social studies teacher, is to create a geographer and a historian and a political scientist and a psychologist out of my students. And I think that a real understanding and an integration of hard writing skills is so important to that. And so I'm grateful to you, but I'm grateful to this discussion in general for reinforcing that emphasis in my mind. So I'm really looking forward to taking this energy into the next couple of units in all of my classes, and seeing where that goes. And then obviously taking the RAFT.
Totally. Take
the
it.
RAFT activity
use it.
as well. Yeah.
I think that's one of the, I always, for some reason, I always think of that acronym and I'm like, oh, I should use that. And then I just say, oh, you're going to write it from a different perspective.
That's right.
But that, it just makes it a little bit more specific, because they're like, you have to have them write it out. So what's your role?
Right.
Who's the audience?
Right.
So it just makes it a little more clear. But yeah, I mean, that's why I love teaching English language arts, because I feel like it's so applicable to everything. If I could go into everyone's class and be like, ooh, right now you could do this activity.
Right.
And the teacher might be like, we don't have time for that. But I'd be like, but just 20 minutes, just this one little thing. And then it'll just open up their minds a little bit. But it seems so simple to me, but I also don't know what it's like to have to cover all of the curriculum that everyone has to cover. My class is so skills based. I'm like, we can do anything as long as we cover these skills, right? Yeah. And then everyone else is like, I have content. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but the skills with the content will make it so much more interesting.
Right.
But anyway, so thank you very much. I look forward to seeing what your students come up with these RAFT activities.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. All right. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
This has been The Limits of Our Language. Join us next time for more ideas about how to bring writing to learn into your classroom. See you then.